You're listening to an ASCI Lounge podcast.
This is Talking Supply Chain, where we tackle the most important supply chain topics and trends with the industry's best and brightest.
You know, I'm excited today. Over the last 12 months, we've addressed the three streams of supply chain. One is processes and systems, one is emerging technology, and the third one is people. And today we're going to talk about people. We're going to deep dive. It's been a difficult year and we've got a lot of change. We've had to manage a lot of change. I think it's a good time to start talking about how we embrace this change, because it's more than change. It's unknown change. It's discontinuous change. It is what by the textbook definition is called ambiguity. So we're going to talk about embracing ambiguity. We're going to do it a little bit different today. Rather than having a presentation, we've got two wonderful guests with us and we're going to have a conversation. Let's have a conversation, grab a coffee, sit down, and let's talk about how we as supply chain managers embrace ambiguity. Let me set the scene. We all know that 2020 has been an awful year. It's been a year like never before. We will look back with 2020 hindsight with a totally different definition of that term. We started the year with the release of ASCI's State of Supply Chain, and we learned that companies are busily involved in trying to work out how to digitalize their workplace. We were frantically trying to catch up with what's going on around us, to digitalize, to upgrade our teams, upgrade our systems, and upgrade our organizations and our supply chains. We were flat out trying to figure out how to manage Industry 4 digitalization. At the same time, we were hit with a national firestorm. We were hit with the Australian bushfires that interrupted our supply chains, interrupted our logistics, interrupted our markets, and interrupted the lives of our people. No sooner had we emerged from the firestorm that we found out about COVID, and COVID hit hard and fast and disrupted our lives forevermore. Wow. In a webinar a couple of weeks ago with my friend Andy Brightmore from Compass, he's reminded us that we didn't know if COVID would last for 6 days or for 6 weeks, but we did think it would be another episode, like our TV type lives, like the firestorm. We figured it would come and go and we'd get back to normal. But now 8 months into it, it's not normal. It's here to stay and it's constantly changing. In Australia, we basically have COVID under control, although it's flared up again in Adelaide. And that's threatening the opening of our borders. In Europe and in England, they're going back into lockdown for a second and some places third time. And of course, America is yet to be under control. So we have all these things facing us. We have the change of digitalization. We have the change of outside forces interrupting our supply chain. And then we've got COVID on top. What will happen next year? Who knows? Who can tell? But what we do know is that we're going to continually to be faced with ambiguity. One of these areas of ambiguities is how do we deal with each other once we start heading out in being normal people again? Do we wear masks? Do we shake hands? Do we not shake hands? If someone wants to shake our hands, how do we go about saying, well, no, not me, thanks, without offending them? How do we understand what the rules of our buyers' companies' COVID regulations are compared to ours? How do we manage all of this, and how do we keep our families, our staff, and ourselves sane through this discontinuous change? That's what I want to talk about today. And to help us do that, we've got two wonderful guests in no particular order, but starting with the first one on the slide, we've got Kerryn Fewster. Kerryn is an old friend of ASCI's, and it's wonderful to have her back. She is an expert and a specialist in ambiguity and change. Hello, Kerryn. It's nice to have you with us.
Thank you so much. And it's Fewster. I just have to correct that.
Oh.
I know it's tricky, but I'm just going to correct that up front.
I think you should. My name's Scotland. It's a bit easy. See, I've got it easy. Although people always ask me, how do I spell it, which is a bit annoying. Our second guest is Pippa Gardner. Pippa is a reformed journalist, a former senior executive at Australia Post, and for the last 10 years has been working with ASX listed companies in corporate communication and culture, and has been helping them understand how to change, I guess. So welcome to you, Pippa.
Hello, thank you for having me.
I was hoping today that we could just have a general conversation after that intro of where I tried to paint this rather confusing environment that we've found ourselves in. I was hoping that we could talk about how we as supply chain managers who are working with our staff, with our own team, across the organisations, but also along both up and down our supply chains. How do we manage in this type of environment of such confusion? And perhaps, Kerryn, I could ask with you, could you sort of talk to me what you think ambiguity is, and how do we as individuals manage that? How do we handle it individually?
Sure. Thanks for having me. What an enormously huge first question. So, the thing about, I guess that where my interest and passion around this comes from is that we work across Change2020. We work across many different industries and organisations and with lots of different people. And what we were noticing is that less and less people were able to deal with the pace and the complexity of change. And it was because it wasn't just change, it was much more around ambiguity. So what is ambiguity? It is unfamiliar, it's uncertain, it's new, it feels chaotic. We don't necessarily have anything in our past to lean back on and say, I've seen this before, or I can leverage off that learning. And so I use the term, it's kind of like a fog. There's so much going on around us, and we can't hold on to anything that's real and tangible and say, this is the way forward. We've actually just got to back ourselves and hope that it is the way forward. And if it's not, we've got to be okay to say, how do I change really, really rapidly? Because if I don't, I get stuck. And so, ambiguity is that confusion. It's chaotic and it's new. And how do we manage it? Which is obviously that enormous question. There's lots of different components to that. But I guess I have to say, ultimately, for me, it's you've got to find a way where you can move forward, where you don't actually get stuck and potentially get run over or run past by others.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when you come to communication, Pippa, the whole point of communication is clarity, as is leadership. We'll come back to leadership with Kerryn shortly. But how do you achieve clarity when it's so confusing? How do you try and get that clear communication going?
Well, it's about being consistent in your communication. So we don't have all the answers, we know that, but it's about being open and transparent with your team, because as a leader, it's about building trust. You want your team to trust you. How do you build that trust? Through open and transparent and regular communication. So it's not about suddenly hosting could be a virtual town hall with your team, announcing big changes to your organisation, and then no one hears anything from that leader for another 6 weeks. It's about regular communication, communicating as well when things aren't going well, when you don't know all the answers. I liken it to, think about if you're at home and your dishwasher has broken, and the repair person has come to repair that dishwasher, and they said, oh yeah, I just need to get an extra part for that. I'll give you a call when it comes in. And you're thinking, okay, but when's it going to come in? 1 week goes past, 2 weeks go past, 3 weeks goes past. The frustration that starts to build because you don't know what's going on. But if that person gave you a call after 5 days, Pippa, that part, we're having difficulty getting that in. I'm hopeful it will be here by next Thursday. I'll give you a call to give you an update. You feel so much more in control. You're still upset that you don't have a dishwasher that's working, but you're more in control because you know what's coming next. And that's the role of a leader in communicating. So we may not have the answers, but this is what I can tell you now. This is what we are working towards, so that you build that unity and you build that team and the trust.
Yeah, we used to call that buying ourselves time. When I was in Express Freight, we'd say we'd ring you back in 4 hours, and then you'd ring back in 1 hour. And if you ring back within 1 hour, you bought yourself a whole day. People didn't care again if they didn't hear for a little while, because you'd already done that. Over communicate rather than under communicate. But in this area of trying to get clear communication, Kerryn, you mentioned you've got to back yourself. I would think that at the moment it's really hard to figure out how to back yourself. How do you find the starting point? How do you find that bit where I'm comfortable is not going to change?
Well, firstly, we can't have that because it is going to change. There is nothing surer than that. We know that change is that constant. And this year's proven that clearly, as you said in your introduction. So I think that people who are wedded to saying, I just want it to stop now, I just want it to slow down, they're the ones who, certainly we look out for. They're the ones whose, their mental well-being is at greater risk because they're trying to control the uncontrollables. So what can you control? I can control how I'm going to hold myself today, the conversations I'm going to have. I can't always control my emotions, but I can recover from them if they take over me. Working out what you can control is the first thing. I think that those who are so lost are those who are worried about everything else that's going on. And look, of course we are, because I'm supposed to go to South Australia for holidays this year, and I've got family coming in from Melbourne for that, and I'm really wanting to be there because I miss them. I can't control that at the moment, so me worrying about it is not going to get anywhere. And the worry is really what's causing people, that level of anxiety, and that definitely leads to some of our concerns around mental health. But purely from a work perspective, we can't perform well when we're like that. So I have a really clear viewpoint that what can you be clear about when you can't be certain? So if you, to Pippa's point as well around leadership, so if you are saying, look, here's my town hall, here's my 3 messages, keep them to 3 and be really clear on what it is that you can tell them. Give people clarity because you can't give them certainty. And I think that's the really important thing here, that accepting that our brains crave and want certainty, accepting that we can't get that at the moment, and then saying, well, what do I actually know to be true? Well, I know that today I'm going to be attending a webinar for 1 hour. I can control that. I can control my attendance. For some people, that's all they want. For other people, they might want a further look ahead. But knowing what you can say is, I'm clear about this and I'm certain about this, that helps out. That helps us tremendously, because we're not continually being sideswiped by the what ifs and all the other problems that are going on. Yes, they're relevant, but they're certainly not in my control and most people's control who's on this call today. So that for me is how you back yourself. What do I know that I can control? All the other factors are relevant, but I'm not going to let them crowd me any longer, because this again comes back to the fog. There's so much going on, I don't even know where to focus.
I love that comment you made of clarity, because you can't give certainty. Go with clarity, not with certainty. You got a comment, Pippa?
Yeah, no, I agree. And you need to, if you can't give certainty, which many of us can't, because we also don't have a crystal ball and things are continuing to change. And even when we do have a plan or a strategy, then something changes as well along the way, as we saw with a global pandemic. So, trying to give people clarity, but giving regular clarity as well. And also really understanding. So if your team is dispersed, so then you might now have a section that are working from home, some that are actually in a distributing facility, understanding how you get those messages to them, because it's very different if you're in a head office than it is that you are in a distribution centre. So making sure that your message is consistent, but also that it is connecting with that audience. So whether it's, if your head office, you're running your town halls where people can come in virtually to it, whether there's other ways of, if it is in that distribution centre, then it's unlikely that an email probably will connect. So it's whether you're having smaller teams that are together and you're having that face-to-face stand-up, but making sure the message is getting through to each different audience that it needs to get through, so that your team all works together. It's like sending a football team out to play, but only giving 6 of them what the strategy is out on the field. You need to make sure that everyone is together and everyone has that clarity and that same message.
I'd like to pick up this idea about how we manage our teams when they're dispersed. But before we do that, can we go back just to the individual thing, back to Kerryn? This quote that I mentioned to you a little while ago, the quote says, if uncertainty is unacceptable to you, it creates fear. But if you can embrace uncertainty, it creates innovation, alertness, and creativity. Three things that are absolute requirements of supply chain management these days. We have to be innovative, we have to be alert, and we have to be creative. It's changing constantly. So, but this is saying that we have to embrace uncertainty, or embrace ambiguity, I guess. What are the key points? You may have addressed it before, but what should we take away and what should we say we need to understand? We can't get to certainty, but is there anything else within ourselves that we should be trying to manage as well?
Yeah, for sure. Like we actually embarked on a research project with QUT to better understand everything about ambiguity and why some people are able to embrace it, to use your words. So how do they embrace that ambiguity and they find that opportunity in there? Well, it starts with their mindset, which is that there is opportunity inside of the ambiguity rather than outside of it. So to jump into it. Our research identified a number of habits that people who have a higher tolerance for ambiguity tend to exhibit on a regular basis. And, you know, no surprises here, they weren't about putting in more spreadsheets or Gantt charts. It's actually all about mindset and behaviour. And so some of those habits include, you know, cultivating your curiosity. So to your point around that quote, if I can get comfortable with that uncertainty and I can sit with it, I can try and unpick what is the real dilemma here by asking more questions, exploring and experimenting. I'm using creative ways of solving new and complex problems. And so looking at that from a creative perspective, and we know that saying, if I keep trying to do the same thing to try to solve new problems, you know, it's a definition of uncertainty, which I'm sure is said much better somewhere else.
Insanity, I think it was. Definition of insanity.
Insanity, exactly right. And so, you know, we know what that's about. Yet I have to say, we see people continuing to try and do the same, use the same techniques and practices to solve these new problems. So our research identified that there's around about 10% of the people who have completed an assessment that we've developed that says, well, how tolerant are you of ambiguity in the workplace? And those 10%, they are curious, they're courageous, they're creative, they're mindful, they are agile, they're flexible, they can be very focused on what we need to be doing. And, you know, they're assertive about how they say we've got to move forward. And it's like anything, you know, it takes time for us to get good at those particular habits because, you know, we don't necessarily, that's not our go-to. Our go-to is to really say, you know, I want to find out everything that's available to me before I can make that decision. Well, decision making is challenging now, but to not decide is problematic. So you've got to find some different techniques, and it does take courage and it does take curiosity to all of those things I just mentioned. And what I quite like about this data is that it is research based. And so there is nothing that's telling us that there's a magic wand out there that's going to make decision making easier if we have more, you know, more pieces of data. It certainly says let's get information from different places and involve different people, etc. Of course, all the diversity, but there's not a quick fix. It's actually up here. It's our mindset and it's our behaviour, and those 10% are the people who exhibit those habits on a fairly regular basis.
I think I'd like to hire some of those people. I should have mentioned before that your company is called Change2020.
Yes.
Is it right?
Yes.
And so it's change2020.com.au?
.com, yes.
.com. And all that information is available there about how to learn more about the managing ambiguity. Yeah, I think that's
absolutely.
So let me just push that a bit further. And here, that sounds wonderful, Kerryn, fantastic. But I'm in November. I'm tired. I've been doing this since before Christmas last year, and then I had the bushfires, and then I had COVID, and then and I've got mum sick, and I'm tired. How do I do all that when I'm tired? Surely, can't I just find some sort of certainty somewhere?
If you can, give me a call. Look, you know, that is probably the thing that we're seeing mostly across our our clients at the moment. The fatigue is beyond anything I think I've seen before, because we thought it was a sprint, as you said at the beginning, but it's clearly a marathon. And you know what? Even once we've done the first 42 Ks, we've probably got to go again. And it's absolutely exhausting. Firstly, it's for me, it's like, accept that it is, recognize that it is, and don't beat yourself up so much about that. The other thing I think is really important, and I've been saying this to organisations, is if you can, if you've got the energy to pick up a pen and paper or use notes on your phone or whatever you want to do, is write down, start to collect the stories, start to collect what you did really, really well. You know, we've seen some extraordinary pivots and changes, so people have been able to survive, reinvent their business. You know, the learning has been quite extraordinary. The fact that our communities have come together, there's been some amazing things. Like you started by saying, wow, what a year. It's been pretty horrible. And you're right in lots of ways. It's also been pretty remarkable, I think. And so when you're going, God, not another day, this, grab your pen, grab your paper, you know, reflect. What did you do well? What did you do that you didn't think you could do? And yet you've done it. And the reason I think it's important to write it down is that, had we known in March, when our Prime Minister said, guess what, everyone, we're not allowed to go and hang out with each other anymore, and no more footy other than for him, and, you know, other things like that. Had we known then, what decisions would you have made then, had we known it was going to be a seven-month haul at least? And you know what? It might be another 7 months. So if you start to write down what you've already done well and the decisions you made, and you know, it's one, it starts to capture stories, which, you know, good leaders should be great storytellers, but it also reminds you and gives you a bit of an anchor for how do we go forward from there, because it hasn't all been doom and gloom. Like, I've got some extraordinary stories of organisations we worked with. Like one really quick one, an organisation had a strategy to go paper free by September 2022, and they did it in 2 weeks because they had to. What's really interesting is now as they're starting to go back to the office, obviously the printer's starting to churn again. And I'm really asking them to test themselves. Why do you need to do that? Because environmentally, it's obviously better, but they've saved a truckload of money because they're not printing anymore. And so remind yourself about what you've done really well, and just hold on and find a mate, because you've got to be chatting about this sort of stuff. Don't expect to do it by yourself. And particularly as a leader, be human. It's totally okay to say, I'm having a pretty ordinary day today. It connects with people. It doesn't actually make you look like you're not coping. It just makes you more human.
That's a great answer. I was so involved in that answer, I forgot to think about what to ask you next. That's really good. The success stories in Australia this year have been in supply chain. Supply chain has pivoted. They've been resilient. They have rebuilt. They have restructured. We in supply chain have driven these successes in so many different ways. And so there's lots of stories. How do you tell a good story to your team and to yourself, Pippa? How do we structure that? That was a question without notice, and I'm just throwing you under the bus almost. But how do I do that? What Kerryn was talking about, how do I tell myself and tell my team a good story?
Well, you think about that storytelling and the power of it. So think about why, with children's stories as well, the morals of stories, of telling them a story about Goldilocks and the 3 bears. It's a really simple story that has a moral, isn't it? So it can be retold as well. So people take that away. If people can experience, they feel far more connected to it than just regurgitating information. So think about, first of all, who your audience is. What do they care about? And what is that moral? What is the point that you want to make? And then tell that story, and tell that story in really simple language. So you don't need to litter it with all these big words. I use the example of, I wouldn't say to you, oh, James, would you like an elongated yellow piece of fruit for morning tea? Say no, Pippa, but I'd love a banana.
Sure.
And the more that we can tell stories, so as a leader, if we can share a story with our team, they can then go and share it with their team. It's easier to retell that story instead of just regurgitating information. And it makes it really connect with your audience. So if I use an example of, I had a role where I was working as the Chief of Staff to the Group Chief Financial Officer of Australia Post, who was then Janelle Hopkins. And under our remit, we had data science and a really clever guy, which some people in your supply chain may have come across, Silvio Giorgio. He's the GM of data science. And data science is, these guys who code and they've got their heads down in the computer and they're extremely intelligent people. But you've got all this information here. If you can't pull out the insight and pull out the story, then it's useless. It's almost like having a bar of gold sitting on your table. A bar of gold isn't going to be able to buy you anything into a shop. So it's coming up with that story. These guys did an enormous amount of work at Australia Post in improving customer service and also improving safety. And one of the things they did which is one of the great stories at my time there, is they analysed all the data about accidents that posties were involved in. 3 posties are involved in an accident every day across Australia, which is huge. And so they wanted to find out why. So they crunched all this data. And one of the things they found was that you are 50% more likely to have an accident on your first day back at work after a 7-day break. So pulling out that information, they pulled this together and they had to communicate that to the business. So instead of just saying, oh, look, that data has shown this, it was drilling it down to a simple story of you are 50% more likely to have an accident on your first day back at work after a 7-day holiday. They then came up with a way to send a text message to that driver and that driver's manager the night before they were to return to work to alert them to this so that they would be more conscious and more alert on the road of their risks. And then they reduced that figure, which was a huge win. And Silvio Giorgio, who is the GM of data science, is a brilliant storyteller. He said data science is about data in organisations is about embedding it into decision making, embedding it into the culture, but also being able to communicate that in a great story to make it blow people's socks off so they wake up and go, wow, we've got to do something about it. So storytelling is so important to get people to take action.
So the lesson I got out of that was to try and think about what the moral of the story is so that you build the story around the moral. Yeah. And that builds on what Kerryn was saying about we can't have a certainty, but we can have clarity. So there's a sort of a common theme coming through. One of the things that we want as members of a team is sort of business as usual, to understand what business is, how do we go about doing what we do. It comes down to values and processes and systems. But in a time of discontinuous change or ambiguity, is there such a thing as business as usual? And how do we define it in a story? A simple question. I'll start with Kerryn. Perhaps she's good at taking the hard ones for you, Pippa. What's business as usual? Can we define it, and should we not worry about it?
Okay, so for me, I'm absolutely not a fan of that term at all. I'm working on a very large merger at the moment, and I was talking about we've got to bring the people together and the culture, etc. And the CEO said to me, "Look, it's pretty much business as usual." I said to him, let's just work our way through whether it would be business as usual. People have got different leaders, they've rebranded the business, all these things are going through. And I said, but at the end of the day, yes, these people might be doing what they did yesterday, but we know that that's going to change really, really rapidly. And I think that there's a level of unnatural comfort associated with that term, and leaders use it way too freely. So personally, I'm not a fan of it. I believe that we should tell the story as it is. And it's that whole concept of this is what we're going to do, because we don't have all the answers yet. It's like that, that 3-letter word is so powerful. It says to people, we don't know yet, but when I do know something, I will let you know. until then, this is what I can be clear about in terms of what your role is. And look, I know we've got, massive organisations, and we're not going to go and talk to every single person individually. That's not what I'm proposing. But you can be clear that, hey, if you've been a postie driver, to take Pippa's story, you will continue to do that for, we have no plans to make that any different for the foreseeable future or until March next year, whatever it might be. So you give people some level of certainty. Meanwhile, the colour of their postie bikes might change. The name of the organisation might change. Their uniform might be different. They might have a different leader. All of those pieces of change, if you're the CEO, that's almost like, okay, we just have to do this. But if I'm the driver, that could be everything for me. That could be enormous. And I think that that's one of the things that's dangerous with using that term, is that people definitely adapt to change differently. That is a fact. And to say to people, it's the same, get on and get going, causes more anxiety. And so I'm actually a bit of an advocate for, can we wipe out business as usual and get rid of that acronym totally?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of BAU. But it is one that we hear often, and in supply chain, people want supply chain to be the standard, the business as usual, the constant in the organisation, and yet it can't be. It's got to change constantly. Pippa, did you have a thought on BAU?
Well, I don't think there is such a thing as BAU anymore, that everything is changing all the time. I think it's about communicating it keeps coming back to that, communicating regularly with your teams and having that a trusted leader who is open and transparent. I think it's also really important that we have feedback loops. So people have the opportunity to be heard, and they have the opportunity to give feedback and to be part of the solution. We spoke about, just before we came on to the webinar, about COVID and Australians' response to that, instead of just being told what to do. When people are part of the solution, they feel far more invested in it than being told, you just have to do this and put up and shut up. It's about bringing people along for the journey and getting them to be part of that solution and explaining to them why that they're doing it, but giving them that opportunity to be heard and for their feedback to be taken on board. Whether it changes the decision, it may not, but it's still giving people that opportunity to be heard. And that's one of the challenges we now have with people working remotely, and some people who might be in an office, some people who are working from home, people who are working in different states or from overseas. One of the things we have to be able to cultivate is, how do we still bring people together to troubleshoot problems and still communicate and connect as a team?
I think it was the Federal Reserve, the chairman of the Federal Reserve in America said this week that we are never going back to the way it used to be, and that dispersed working from home, working on our computers, working from the beach or wherever is going to be the way of now. That's the way it works now. And so it's a natural progression from what we've just been talking about: uncertainty, clarity, not certainty, telling a story. It brings us to this type of meeting, to the Zoom meetings, the team meetings, the way that we will engage with humans. How do we do social interaction? And I want to spend a few minutes now talking about social interactions. And let's start with this idea of, what are the tips? What do we need to know about being good at socially interacting to a screen?
Okay. Well, the first one is it's knowing your audience and what they care about. Microsoft scientists did a wonderful study that found that back in 2000, the average human attention span was 12 seconds.
Episodic. Sure.
What happened around 2000? We started to get smartphones. Today, the average human attention span is just 8 seconds. So 12 to 8 seconds. It's extraordinary, isn't it? A goldfish's attention span is about 9.
I need to have shorter questions then, because my questions are too long.
It's about good communication takes preparation. So it's about really understanding what your audience cares about, understanding what the objective of this communication is. So if you're having a meeting, everyone has Zoom fatigue. I've spoken to former colleagues that say that it's even more difficult than it was in the office, because at least I had time in between a meeting to go to the bathroom. Now it's scheduled back to back, and we're tired. We're tired of being on and staring at a screen. So it's so important to be able to get to the point and understand what your objective is and what your audience cares about. So getting rid of the elongated yellow piece of fruit, speaking to what your audience cares about, and really outlining what the objective is of that meeting, and making sure that you have got what you need from that meeting, so you're not then going on and having another meeting after that.
You're nodding, Kerryn. So you agree? Can you have good social interaction via the screens, and how do you do that?
Well, I believe we have to, because I also agree. I don't think we're going back. I don't see any evidence of that, despite people saying I want things to go back to normal. So we have to find a way. Humans are better when we connect. There's no doubt about it. But even this format today, James, it just makes it easier because it's conversational. And yes, we've had a bit of a chat in advance about that. You might ask some of these questions, but really this is a way to connect with people, because we're having a chat. And I know it's not my job to do so, but I'd encourage the participants, if they've got any questions or comments, to throw them into the chat room, because that helps us to connect to you as well. I really honestly think that one of the best things about this is, I don't know if people heard before, but Siri started answering a question of mine, and I'm like trying to cover her up, and I can hear my dog going. But that's that humanization that we've all experienced 100 times. And a story comes to mind really briefly of a CEO who I'm coaching, and he was having he just said, I'm fed up. I just want to go back to how things were. I want to go back to my office. I like it there. It's where everyone knows me. It's like the pub, where everyone knows my name. And he just was feeling really rotten. Anyway, I had to do a town hall, and he said, I haven't got it in me today. And I said to him, just let people know that. Let people know that you're having a bit of a tough time today. He was doing his, ridiculously, still doing his town halls and putting on a jacket and a tie. And I said, no one thinks that you haven't got your boardies on. Everyone knows what's going on. So just be more human and connect with people. And I think that's it, that if it's tough, just say so, because I can't imagine any person on the globe. I was coaching someone in Costa Rica yesterday. Their world's the same, except they're a bit more frightened because they're closer to the States. But they are grappling with the same things. And I think that understanding that first and foremost and connecting on that human element is critical. The other thing, absolutely to Pippa's point, is there is no rule at all that says a meeting has to be an hour. You can do it in 17 minutes, do it in 17 minutes, and jump off, give people a break, get up, go for a walk, reconvene later if you need to, but don't hold on because you feel the time frame set like that.
The people in Costa Rica are wearing board shorts. If I'm living there, I want to be wearing board shorts. And if I forget to ask you any questions that I said I would, it's just because I've got the attention span of a goldfish apparently, and I can't remember. When we do go back to meeting humans again. By the way, apparently the most common expression for the last 8 months has been, you're on mute, because we all do it, don't we? When we go back to meeting people, how are we going to navigate cultural norms? Now, the definition of a cultural norm is an unspoken expectation. We just know how close to stand to each other. We know how, when to bring a bottle of wine to a family meeting or a box of chocolates. So they're just things that we know and they're not explained. With the COVID rules in place, or with COVID hanging around, and we know that it's under control, but it might not stay under control, and we don't want it all to go crazy again. Some organisations are very worried about it. Others are quite lax about it. Some are saying, don't have in-place meetings. Others are saying go back to meetings. We're going to have to navigate this with our teams, with ourselves, understand what we think is safe, what our teams think is safe, and with our suppliers and buyers. Have you got any suggestions on how we can navigate that? How do we start understanding what other people are expecting? How do we read the signs? How do we know what to do? what's the new rules? Any ideas?
I'm happy to kick off because I actually did have a face-to-face meeting about 6 weeks ago, and it would have been one of my first since March. And I was meeting a new client, and I met the COO and the head of people and culture, and they both said, they kind of just said hello to me. The CEO walked in, and he's a big bloke in stature, and I was sitting down with the other two, and he put his hand out to me, and I stood up. And I before that happened, I said, "Oh, I guess we don't shake hands." And he put his hand out quite firmly and said, "Why not?" And I found myself going straight into autopilot and shaking his hand.
Mm.
And I've thought about this a bit lately because, so one, for him as the leader, so he's setting a standard that I'm pretty sure he hasn't asked other people about, because as I was exiting, the head of people and culture said, "I'm really sorry about that. We're working on what our protocols are. We haven't quite mapped them out yet." So as a leader, be aware of what your behavior is, because you'll set the standard and people will follow. I think that it for me, it is about, had I not been caught off guard, I probably would have said, we're actually, me and my company, we're actually not shaking hands. I've got a couple of people who are more at risk in my circle who I live with. And until we've got more clarity on things, we're just, I'm not much of a fist pumper or elbow pumper. So I'm happy to just say hello. And had I had my time over again, I would have done it. I would have set that clearly without it sounding like, that he was encroaching on me or anything like that, because it was habitual and takes us a hell of a long time to undo bad habits or even great habits. And, for me, I was always very happy to shake someone's hand. So it's about, I think, being really aware that what's okay for you is not necessarily the standard for other people. And so I would say it's almost like less is more. So be more hesitant, and certainly in organisations, I think that larger organisations where they're welcoming people into their businesses, they're doing a really good job of checking in, and you get your temperature taken and they wash your hands for you and everything like that's happening. But I think for the person who's out there on their own, who's going into a new organisation to meet a new customer or supplier or an existing customer, it is about saying that's not what we're going to be doing until we have some more information. So it doesn't break that human connection. It just says it's not what we're doing at the moment. And I do think we need to be pretty clear and comfortable on that.
It's almost like having your elevator pitch when you go into a networking event of understand, when you talk about who you are, it's about understanding, okay, well, what are the rules for me with interacting with people and having that line. So it's not aggressive, it's not offensive, it's just very clear. And we're not doing that in our organisation. We have people at risk. I also think it's the duty of organisations that, safety is paramount at so many large organisations, and this is something that needs to be leader-led. We know that if safety isn't leader-led, then that's when we do have incidents. And now our health and our well-being is another arm of safety. It's not just, it is our physical and our mental health and safety.
I think that's a really good point you make, though, about having this elevator pitch of how we want to handle that situation, because we are going to get into that situation. Every one of us individually have our own way of understanding what the risk is for us and for everyone else. And so, get the words right, I think. I guess practice it and maybe talk to the team. Would it be a good idea to sort of talk to your team and say, how are we going to handle this as a group? It occurs to me that the way that we shake hands is 100% just a cultural norm. That's all. Because I'm of an age where back in the day, you didn't actually shake the hands of a woman. But we went through that in the sort of 70s and 80s, and they sort of started, as a business greeting, they stuck their hand out and you started shaking the hands, and it's a very nice way to greet anyone. It's not a male or female thing. But likewise, I spent a lot of time in Asia, and Asians don't shake hands. They do the bow, and we could do that. We could actually just accept that without doing the stupid elbow bump thingy. It sounds to me like what you're saying is that we need to just get with our team and talk about how we're going to handle this individually and collectively. And as leaders, we really should drive that. Is that the message?
Yeah, and it's important to have that feedback loop so that you can do that. So it's if we're not face to face with our teams, being able to pull people in to have that discussion as well, because there might be differing views, and this differing views that we haven't necessarily thought of. So we might have that you might be that CEO who is very well. Of course, we shake hands. The CEO that Kerryn met, very confident with no. Of course, this is what we do. But if he had had the opportunity to perhaps discuss that with his leadership team and hear their views that, well, we don't feel that that's the right thing to do because it's putting our people at risk, then he would be aware of that situation to think, okay, well, I need to set that example and lead like that. Or it's having that taking that conversation offline. So perhaps even Kerryn, maybe the head of people and culture, had a chat to him afterwards and said, Tim, maybe this isn't something that we should be putting people in that situation. So we should be leading. But it's about having that clear communication and being brave enough to have that conversation with your team or with your leader.
Kerryn? No?
Yeah, totally agree. As I say, had I thought it through, I would have responded, but I didn't have my elevated pitch. So that's a good idea, Pippa, because it was just, presented to me. We're all grappling with it. And that's the other thing. This is not something that you go, oh, this feels awkward for me. Welcome to the rest of the world. We're all going, how do we do this? I mean, the bow, that might work. I don't know. I don't know. Thumbs up when you see someone, whatever. Like one thing what I have actually enjoyed about this way of communicating has been that nearly all meetings I have now, I found myself waving goodbye to people just as I hang up, and I kind of like it. It just connects a bit closer again, and it's just a different way. So I don't know, maybe we'll be the wave a bit more. And I think, we just wait and we see, but to be clear to Pippa's point, this is not what we're doing, and I think that, like, to me, it's a bit, I do have, my partner has asthma, my sister has really bad asthma, my mum's older. I've got all those, like most of us, right? I've got all these things, so I can legitimately say I've got some people at risk that I don't want to expose anything to, and that's a fact. It'll take me a while to get comfortable with it because it doesn't feel, it's not my habit yet. So we've got to start practicing, because if you set that standard, for you, particularly in your industry, you're out and about meeting and dealing with lots of different providers along the whole supply chain. So adopting what they're putting forward, but also being brave enough to say, well, we've also got some policies and procedures or approaches. Maybe it's just an approach. And this is how we're setting our standards to keep our people safe, to people's point.
It's been a good conversation. I think we probably need to wrap it up soon so that we can have some questions and answers about the registration process. So I'll throw to you in a second and just ask you for your last comments. One of the things that occurs to me that's come through in COVID is that everyone's trying to do the right thing. We're all trying to live the right way, and yet everyone's got a different view of that. And I heard a story of someone in a supermarket where there was another lady. Weird things happen in supermarkets. It's just this sort of microcosm of life. And the other lady said, we're supposed to be 1.5 meters away, so you move away. Right? In other words, everyone else, I'm the one that is the center point, and everyone else social distance from me. So, and I see this when I'm running in the morning. There's these people taking up the middle part of the path and letting everyone go around them. And my attitude is that I just have to accept that they're trying to do the right thing. It might be annoying to me, but they're trying to do the right thing. And it seems to me that's what we need to take forward when we're dealing with our staff and with our ourselves and with our networks. We have to understand that everyone's trying to do the right things, but it's very unclear. And I think the takeaway for me was this idea about trying to get clarity when there's no certainty. So with those thoughts, I throw to you and say, give us some sort of wrap-up thoughts on what we can take away from this conversation. Start with Kerryn, I guess.
Sure, and you might be the one that's on my running track. I got yelled at the other day, and I was sure it was 1.5. I just wished her a good day. I hope a good day. Anyway, perhaps I was too.
But that's the point. Everyone's trying to do the right thing, but they just think everyone else is doing the wrong thing. It's this.
Yeah. Well, I guess that, for me, the point is we're in this together. Ambiguity is without any doubt the norm. It's here, and it does feel frightening and it does feel chaotic. But by seriously saying, what can I do today? What can I control? Rather than trying to take on too much, and being mindful. And I encourage you just those deep breaths to calm down your fear so you can take a step forward. Because it's not going away. We cannot wish this one away. And the whole concept of bouncing back, absolutely we need to rebrand what resilience is, which is bouncing forward. And so we've got to look forward and find a new way. And, and you're not alone. You are one of a global population. And at the moment, you know what? Over here, we're doing it better than most.
Yeah, Pippa?
It's no doubt that it is so challenging. We don't have a crystal ball. I think communication is key to keeping employees safe, productive, and motivated. I think it's so important that if you think you're communicating, communicate even more than that, and have a really regular rhythm and different ways of connecting with your team. So it could be a weekly email of you explaining what you're up to this week, what I'm working on, and make sure you have that feedback loop. Give the opportunity for people to hear what's going on, even if you don't have that, clarity, you don't have that certainty of what it is. It's explaining about what we're working towards and how we're tracking to it. Bring people along for that journey and really let them have that opportunity to be heard, because that's where you have innovation happens. That's how you solve problems, and that's how you keep a team united as well.
They're great words to finish on. Look, I think it's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. There's been a number of issues that have been raised. I'm sure people listening will have many more, but here's just a couple that I've noticed. Embrace ambiguity, that the creativity and the excitement is in ambiguity. We're all going to take Kerryn's point of view and throw out BAU, business as usual, and embrace this idea of the excitement and the growth is inside the ambiguity. Don't be afraid of it. The other one was from Pippa was to over communicate. This is not a time to be silent. This is a time to be out there. We've seen that with some of our state premiers who have been out there talking constantly, even when they've been quite vulnerable and saying, I don't know the answers, but being out there. I liked your comment, Pippa, about when you do communicate, you do it via storytelling. It's put a moral in there and try and tell the story in a way that people can embrace it. And lastly, bring people along. Both of you have been going down this path with us, the last hour or so, about bring people along, involve them, and be vulnerable and say you don't know all the answers, but we can do this together. Would you like to just give us? I didn't get a chance to ask you about your company, Pippa. What's the name of your company, and how do people contact you?
So PG Communications. So if you go to pgcommunications.com.au, it's a strategic comms business. So I work with organisations and their leaders about effective ways to communicate with their teams or external, internal stakeholders.
Nice. And Kerryn, anything you want to say about Change2020? Are you going to change the name? You get asked this all the time, I know.
Oh, yes, we've been asked 4,827 times. No, we're not changing, because it was always going to be about, obviously, what the whole concept was about, vision and looking forward. So, no, we're not changing the name. I guess that, so our research tells us that we can learn to embrace ambiguity and find that opportunity in there. So if you do go to change2020.com, you'll find some details there, or else certainly follow us on LinkedIn, as we post very regularly about this with tools and tips about what you can do right here, right now to make your day a little bit better.
I do follow you, and it's good content, as is the ASCI LinkedIn page and the asci.org.au. With that, thank you to both of you. Thanks for the conversation. It's nice to sit around a table and have a coffee with you in the ways of the new world.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast today. For more information about our supply chain community, visit asci.org.au.